Tonight, we will talk about conflict resolution and just some tools and resources that we have picked up along the way. And we're going to tell you some more stories about conflict in our marriage and how we have, by God's grace, been trying to work through them. Every good marriage has disagreement, okay? If there is a marriage, if there is a relationship where there is never disagreement, that is an abusive relationship. That is an unhealthy relationship. And I have come across couples where the wife agrees with the husband and with everything. And if you ask her a question and he's present, she looks at him. And that's a sign of an abusive relationship. The woman has to have freedom, and the man has to have freedom to have their own opinions and convictions. And there will be disagreements. Melissa and I both have strong personalities. We do disagree, but it doesn't mean that we have to be disagreeable or that has to be the end of our marriage. So we work through disagreements and we resolve conflicts with tools and resources that we'll be sharing tonight. I would like to start with a passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So Paul gives the impression that every Christian should be single and no one should get married. As a matter of fact, from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, the Roman Catholic Church has concluded that clergy should not be married. And there's this idea that singleness is the better way, and people come to that conclusion reading Paul. I think they're misreading Paul, but Paul did have something to say about the blessing of being single. And sometimes it is the easier path. And Paul says, if you do marry, you have not sinned. In other words, you're authorized to be married, okay? Paul has to clarify himself because he does make some statements about singleness as being a gift from God. Then he says, yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. So essentially, Paul is saying marriage is something that you're free to pursue, but if you want to get married, please know that it will be hard. That's what Paul is saying. A couple of passages later, I want you to be free from anxieties. That's what Paul is intending to accomplish when he says, you may want to consider being single. And I do believe that some people thought that they were pursuing happiness by choosing to be married, and in the end, they were a lot more miserable and unhappy married than single. So sometimes singleness can be the best path. But marriage is good, marriage is hard, everything in life that has something good and rewarding in it comes with work. It comes with a price. Last night, if you weren't here, we talked about the differences between men and women. And we're not just different biologically, but God did make us different. If you've been attending our sessions, you have picked up on the fact that Melissa and I have concluded that God's original plan for marriage is equality. The man does not dominate the woman. The Bible has been misused and abused to convey this idea that men are superior to women. Men and women are equal, and yet they are different. So equality is not the same thing as sameness. God created them, male and female, and Melissa was talking last night about how men compartmentalize and women see things in a more holistic way. And a lot of times we pick up on this just in our conversations. Emerson Eggerichs calls this spider webbing. A woman's ability to connect several situations and see them as a whole, whereas men see them in compartments. Women are going to see things in a holistic way. And we talked about, for example, intimacy. You know, a man seems to have no trouble being ready for sex, even if the relationship has been strained at another level. Maybe there was a disagreement during dinner, but the man is able to see sex as another compartment of the relationship. Whereas for the woman, if the relationship is strained until there is reconciliation, sex just does not seem to make sense. And it just illustrates, again, men and women in general. Again, there are exceptions to the rule, but in general, we are different. And we see the world differently. And that is why Paul, giving instructions to husbands and wives in Ephesians chapter 5, he gives separate instructions. Men, love your wives, and wives, respect your husbands. Now, men should also respect their wives, and women should love their husbands, but I think Paul is saying that these are some of the things that come less natural to us and that we need to be more conscious and intentional about. So, speaking of love and respect, Emerson talks about tone and the love and respect tone. Sometimes it's not what we're saying, but when and in the way we are communicating. We have found in our marriage that sometimes we have to choose the right moment to have difficult conversations. And if we bring it up at the wrong time, it does more harm than good, even if what I'm saying is the right thing. But the tone also will either bring about a good response in your spouse, or it will create defensiveness. So if you see your spouse being defensive and feeling uncomfortable and withdrawing, it may be that there is a tone that needs to be changed. And of course, there are some spouses that are absolutely unreasonable and so self-centered, so full of themselves, and so evil that it is, no matter how well you do it, always going to be impossible to find harmony. And we're going to talk about the narcissist later on tonight. But in general, you have married, most of you have married good-willed people who did not intentionally want to make the other person, their lives miserable. But we end up getting into this cycle of conflict because we don't know how to communicate well. So resolving conflict, that's our topic tonight. And the first item we're going to discuss is, it's a skill that doesn't come naturally to me, doesn't come naturally to Melissa. It's called being assertive. And so Melissa, why don't you share a story that illustrates that not being assertive can make things more difficult later, and how we've learned to learn.
So assertiveness is something that when we do premarital counseling now with couples, that's something we tend to deal with a lot. But it's something we didn't get when we were doing our premarital counseling. And I found that when we first got married and for several years, I had a hard time asserting myself. You know, really expressing what my opinions were in certain decisions if he had a very strong opinion. And so one time we moved to Montana. We'd had a string of really bad car problems, like engines blowing, multiple engines blowing, multiple cars in a row. And so we had gotten we moved to Montana, and we wanted to get a second car. Was the original idea?
We were done with used cars.
Yes, I should say.
We were ready for, even if we had to get in debt.
Yes, and as we mentioned prior, Diego's the kind of person that likes to get things done. He likes to be very efficient with his time. So he said, we're going to go to Billings. We live 2 hours from Billings. We were in small town Montana. And we're going to buy a car today. Long story short, we went there, and I kind of felt like a decision like a new car. We needed to weigh a few more options in rather than just do it in one visit to the car dealer. But I didn't express, I wasn't assertive. I didn't really express myself as strongly as I should have. I don't even remember what I said.
You hinted at the fact that you weren't comfortable, or you weren't sure if this was the right decision. But I don't remember feeling like, for you, this is a non-negotiable.
Correct.
And our philosophy has always been with finances that big decisions, we're going to make it together. And I felt like we bought the cars and we were making that decision together.
Yeah.
Because even though you weren't comfortable with it, it seemed like, you were okay, kinda. And if you had been assertive, that might have, we might have had a different outcome.
You would have considered that. But I wasn't assertive. So he wasn't overpowering me or anything. I just didn't know how to express myself clearly, to assert myself. And you know what? I couldn't sleep. Buyer's remorse. I had buyer's remorse. I was like, I can't believe we got these expensive cars.
It was a bad decision.
Yeah.
We bought 2 brand new cars on the same day. And, we made it. We were able to make.
We've now paid them off.
We were able to make the payments. And one thing we learned financially is it's not about being able to make the payments, because you get into debt because you think, okay, I can make the payments, and so you get a loan on your house and a loan on your car, and you have all these debts, and you're able to make the payment, but that's really not a healthy way to live financially.
So fast forward 2 years, and we were moving from Montana to Kansas, and we're going to buy our first house. Well, I was bound and determined not to have buyer's remorse on the house.
Yeah.
And so I really asserted myself this time, and I set down what I felt were my negotiable and non-negotiable boundaries.
Yeah, she set boundaries. That's the important key here. She said, look, financial decisions are affecting the whole family, not just one person. So it has to be made collectively. And you were pretty determined that we were not going to go beyond a certain price range. Your preference would have been for us to rent.
Correct.
But we kind of met each other halfway, but your assertiveness was different.
Yes.
You were clear. This is non-negotiable for me. This is not going to happen. And there is a place for us to do that in marriage.
Yeah. You got to sleep at night.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, being assertive, what is it? Let's just read here a definition. Being assertiveness is the ability to express your feelings and ask for what you want in the relationship. So it's not enough to just give hints and
beat around the bush.
There's no place in marriage for beating around the bush. A healthy marriage is not a marriage where you have to walk on eggshells. You should be able to express yourself clearly. Now again, with the right tone, with love and respect. So assertiveness is a valuable communication skill. In successful couples, both individuals can be assertive. Rather than assuming that their partner can read their minds, they share how they feel and ask clearly and directly for what they want.
Yeah.
So,
and I feel like it's a skill that I really learned later in our marriage, and it's only benefited our marriage, and I feel that we are better for it.
Yeah. Another difference Melissa and I had growing up was in relationship to special days, holidays, birthdays, anniversaries. My mother was a single mother, working hard. We just really didn't take time to celebrate birthdays and Christmas. It just wasn't a big deal in our home. And so guess what? I came into the relationship with that baggage, and Melissa, much different. Birthdays are a big deal. Your father, even after your mom passing away, remembers the anniversary, and it's a big day even after becoming a widower. And so you came into the relationship with very different expectations about birthdays and anniversaries. And so guess what, everyone? I would allow birthdays and anniversaries to pass. And what did that do for you? How did it make you feel?
Not important.
Yeah. Not loved.
Not loved.
Yeah. Neglected, because for you, that's important.
Yeah.
And so how have we been able to work with that?
So I think in this case, we were able to both be assertive. So I asserted that I needed us to not let the day pass as another day. But he also asserted, he said, this is so outside of my growing up that can we work on this together? Can we plan wedding anniversaries together?
Yeah.
And then we'll do it. I'm more than happy to do it, but if you expect me to surprise you, I'm going to surprise both of us and forget.
Yeah.
So he was very clear. He's like, look, I really want to do this, but it has to be something we do together. So he asserted where he felt his boundaries were in relationship to that, and I told him what my boundaries were, and then together, last year, we had a wonderful wedding anniversary, went hiking up at Mount Hood.
And it was an event we planned together. We
Yes.
found someone to take care of the kids, and we had a good anniversary, and it wasn't forgotten. I felt like it was great for me because we were a part of the planning. It wasn't like the burden on me to come up with something romantic and creative and something that would just, because it's just not me, and we have to understand the limitations of each other. Who did you marry?
You want to respect people's personalities,
Yeah.
but then, express that also.
Yes. What is active listening? It is the ability to let your partner know you understand them by restating their message. It's important for us as individuals, even outside of marriage, in any relationship, to be able to listen to another person and understand what they're saying, even if you don't agree with it. And active listening is the ability to listen without interrupting, listen, understand, and then repeat what you just said with different words, which reassures the person that you have actually taken time to value their opinion. And in the end, you may not agree with what they're saying, even in marriage. That's okay. But when we interrupt or when we downplay what they're saying and say, oh, that's ridiculous. How could you say that? We are invalidating their feelings, and it's not good behavior. My son and daughter, 7 and 9 years old, they had a conflict this week. I think it was the worst conflict I've ever seen them have, but this was different. It's not like they were, slapping each other or hitting each other. My daughter was deeply hurt because my son was playing with Julia, Pastor Giancarlo's youngest daughter, and was ignoring her. And Sophia was in school, so Sophia wasn't around. That's usually who Abigail's hanging out with. So Abigail felt left out. She was deeply hurt. And I could tell she wasn't yelling at her brother. She was just her feelings were hurt. And this was probably a good 3 hours where she didn't even want to be around her brother. And so I said, okay, how am I going to do this? So I practiced this on them. I got them both together. I didn't tell them what we were doing, and she didn't even want to look at him. She was so upset. She was hurt. And I said, Caleb, Abigail's going to explain to you how she feels right now, and you're just going to listen. Because Caleb's tendency, as many of us are this way, the moment she starts saying why she's upset, he's going to say, well, no, it's because of this. He's going to defend himself, and he's going to go on the defensive. I said, Caleb, you just listen. You may not agree with her narrative, but you're going to listen, and she's going to talk, and you're going to repeat back to her what she said, and then you're going to explain your side. And it worked really good. Because Abigail, interestingly, much like her mother, without Caleb having to say a word, Caleb didn't even have to say, I'm sorry. Abigail being able to express her feelings and tell her exactly how she felt, she already felt better. Without being interrupted, without Caleb making excuses. So why is it that women, and sometimes men too, we feel better even though we haven't even heard an apology yet? Just being able to put it out there. Why does that make us feel better?
Well, I find, for one thing, at least for me and a lot of my friends, expressing things verbally helps us to process it. And so that opportunity to express it verbally. And I found that a lot of women are quick to forgive and to...
Yeah.
And so she, voiced it.
Yeah.
And then she realized she really didn't want to be that mad at her brother, I think.
Yeah, and don't tell her, oh, there she is. Don't tell her this, but he was more right than her. okay? And I think that as she was expressing her feelings, she was actually realizing how unreasonable she was being. Because most of the time, my son is the one that's neglected when she's with her friends. And he takes that better than she does. So as she talked about it, I feel like, you know, she was processing it by talking, and it helped her realize that she was being unreasonable. So men, especially men, this is a skill we need to work on, and that is active listening. Let them vent. And if they are saying something you don't agree with, it doesn't mean that you have to interrupt because you're not agreeing with what they're saying.
Well, there's another thing that comes to play is that I've noticed that a lot of men want to find a solution. So they tend to be solution-oriented.
Yes.
And so you come with a problem, and I want to give you an idea of how to fix the problem.
Yes.
And so, like, there was one gal, and she was going to work, and she was complaining about her work. Every night she'd come home and complain. And finally her husband's like, why don't you just quit? She's like, you don't get it. I just want to vent. Like, I just need you to listen to me. I don't need you to do anything. I just want you to listen to me. And that's already my solution, is you listening.
Yeah, early on in our marriage, when you would come with an issue unrelated to me, maybe, work-related or related to your family, and my response was, I know exactly what you should do. And I would give you, and that's not what you were looking for. You needed somebody
just to
listen. Because it helps you process your thoughts. And so we need to work on this skill of active listening, because we interrupt each other because we're not agreeing with what the other is saying. And that's not a good way to relate to our spouse. So the next skill, this is really a principle. It's a biblical principle. And I hope that you can leave tonight with this memorized. My response is my responsibility, okay? And so what I mean by that is, no matter how unreasonable and disagreeable my wife may be, maybe something's going on unrelated to me, or maybe it is related to me, but whatever her behavior is that may be disagreeable to me, my response is my responsibility.
It's never the other person's fault that I did that.
I lost my temper because my son was
broke the window.
Hyper, he wasn't listening, he wasn't obeying. No. He has some behavior that may need to be addressed, but me losing my temper is never justifiable. My response is my responsibility. I'm in control of how I'm going to respond to the situation. So I can't control the situation sometimes. It's out of my control, right? But I can control how I respond to it. This is so key. No matter what's in all relationships, not just in marriage, my response is my responsibility. You can't blame someone else for you having an inappropriate response. God gives us the ability to have self-control. And you reacting negatively to another person is not going to make the situation that you're trying to address better. Another skill, you'd think that this is something we learned when we were kids, and it's straightforward, it's, apologies. I have found as a pastor that there are adults that have not learned how to make an apology. Some people don't even say, I'm sorry, ever. I know some people, and these are extreme cases where no matter how much at fault they are, they never admit that they're wrong. They always find a way to shift the blame and point in another direction. But most reasonable people, they say, I'm sorry. Most reasonable people, they say, I'm sorry. But among those, most people make bad apologies. So there is a difference between a good apology and a bad apology, okay? And I'm going to tell you, a good apology is hard. It is very hard. So what is the difference between a good apology and a bad apology? So just going through this list here, there's just 5 characteristics. And I actually have a Bible study. I'm not going to give you a Bible study tonight, but I have a Bible study on this topic where I actually show from Scripture each one of these characteristics of a good apology. A good apology makes no excuses, okay? So it's like this: I'm sorry that I was mean to you yesterday, but if you hadn't forgotten the keys. That's not a good apology, because I'm apologizing for being mean to my wife and saying something disrespectful and unloving to her, but I'm basically saying that you're the reason why I was mean. So a good apology makes no excuses. Another characteristic of a good apology is a good apology specifies the wrong committed. So let's say that I was harsh and I said some offensive words to Melissa yesterday and I crushed her spirit, which is often very common in marriages. And at the end of the day, I know the relationship has been strained and I want things to be better, because most reasonably good husbands, they want the relationship to be good. So I know something is wrong and I know what it is, but I say, you know what, if I did something to hurt you, please forgive me. That's a bad apology. Why? Because it's general. Again, you're really, by saying that, you're defending yourself. You're protecting yourself from vulnerability. If I did something, see, there is an if there, and that if is implying that you're not really as much at fault as you really are. And so a good apology makes no excuses, and it's specific about the wrong committed. Number 3, a good apology accepts consequences. So for example, and this is not the case in our marriage, but my grandfather, he cheated on my grandmother in his 60s. He's sleeping around with a much younger woman, and he gets caught, and there are consequences. Our behavior has consequences. Forgiveness is not equal to removing consequences. A good apology, a person that is truly sorry, accepts the consequences. They don't try to avert the consequences. And I'll tell you more about my grandparents tomorrow. Very interesting story that illustrates a lot of what we've talked about this week. A good apology makes full restitution. So I borrow my neighbor's lawnmower because my lawnmower is in repair. This is actually a true story, only this didn't happen. Let's say I'm using his lawnmower and I run over some rocks and I destroy his lawnmower, right? It's broken. And I take that lawnmower and I say, I'm sorry, and I'm specific, I broke your lawnmower, and then I leave. Is that a good apology? No, a good apology is say, I'm sorry, I broke your lawnmower. I hope there was no sentimental value, but here is a check for the amount that it costs. A good apology makes restitution, right? Or in the case of a man who is sleeping around and unfaithful to his wife, a good apology stops offending. And this is where my grandfather's not a good example, because he gets caught, he's sorry, but he still wants to sleep around with other women. And so is that a good apology? He's sorry because of the consequences, not because of what he did. And he wants to just keep doing it. So if I'm harsh and I hurt my wife's feelings, a good apology comes with a commitment to stop offending. Because a good apology is not the kind that is going to perpetuate the offense. Does that make sense? Every day we err, okay? All of us. We could all apply this on a daily basis. Most of the offenses are minor, they're small, but practice it. Practice it with your children, by the way. It's okay for parents to apologize to their kids. You don't lose dignity, you gain dignity when you are vulnerable and make good apologies to your kids. So, some more examples. I'm sorry for whatever I said yesterday that may have offended you. Is that a good apology or a bad apology? It's a trick question. It's a bad apology. It looks good, doesn't it? Tell the truth. Doesn't it resonate? Doesn't that sound good? I'm sorry for whatever I said yesterday. Because many people don't even say I'm sorry. But I'm sorry for making that insensitive joke. That's a good apology, right? And it comes with more, you know what? I promise I'll never do that again. That's a good apology because you're taking responsibility. It's not, I'm sorry for making that insensitive joke because...
You don't want it to become just an automatic response. It's interesting because in Brazil, they have a little bit of this culture. And whereas every time you're leaving somewhere, they said, I'm sorry if anything. And we were visiting a museum, and I mean, we were there all of 15 minutes, it was getting to close, and I talked to a lady for a few minutes, and as I'm leaving, I'm sorry if I did anything wrong, I'm sorry. It's an automatic response they have in the culture. And so we have to be careful that this doesn't become an automatic response instead of a thinking through, what did I really do?
Yeah. There's a group of people in society that are experts at bad apologies. Does anybody want to guess who they are? Who? Politicians. I got a good example here. I'm not getting political here, okay? I could use Republican or Democrat. It doesn't matter. They're all good at it. This happens to be Hillary Clinton. And this is what her apology sounded like. At the end of the day, I am sorry that this has been confusing to people and has raised a lot of questions, but there are answers to all of these questions. Is this a good apology or a bad apology? Why is it a bad apology? It's not specific. What else?
Just words.
I'm sorry that this has been confusing to people.
What?
It's not what I said that's the problem. It's the people that are confused, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not a good apology because she's not taking responsibility for what she said. She is actually blaming the people for being confused over what she said. So I wish I had more time to cover this. I don't. I'm probably going to spend 5 to 10 minutes. My dad is a narcissist, and I didn't actually identify this until recently. But narcissism, this is just a word that human psychologists have in recent history been applying to certain patterns of behavior that people have. And in many ways, you might look at this list and you might say, well, some of that applies to me, but am I a narcissist? Not necessarily. I think really the essence of it is narcissists are very self-centered, very selfish, and they lack empathy. They can't relate to how other people feel, and it's really all about them. And selfishness is a human condition that is a result of sin. So at the end of the day, we're talking about sin here, and we've all been impacted by sin, but it seems like some people, and some of it is nature, some of it is nurture. Maybe it's based on how they grew up and their predisposition and personality, but they are especially self-centered and egocentric. So some of the characteristics of the typical narcissist, a sense of entitlement, okay? Manipulative behavior, need for admiration, a really big ego, lack of empathy, arrogance, self-importance, exaggerating achievements, and a thirst for power. Now, these are just words, so we need to put some flesh on this. So we're going to share one or two experiences to illustrate. So we've dealt with narcissism.
Yeah, I think of one case of a couple, and when they were dating, would illustrate the manipulative behavior.
Yes, and just before you share this story, one thing that I've observed, and in this person that you're going to share with them about, and my dad, narcissists are very charismatic. They are exceptionally good at winning people's favor. My grandfather, who speaks about my dad, and he basically, the way he describes my dad is, he says, your dad is great at winning people, and he's even better at hurting them later and losing them. And so, yeah, narcissists are good at
So
winning people over.
This gal, when she was dating, her boyfriend was the knight in shining armor, and she had, a full head of curls, and he told her how he just loved her curls and just loved her curly hair. Well, they got married, and the very next day told her, and by the way, I hate curly hair. From now on, you're going to straighten your hair every day.
Yeah.
And so that's very, very manipulative, calculated. Obviously she was in a very abusive situation. It's just one example.
I've found some that are less conscious of the fact that they are being deceptive. Because a narcissist, how do people end up marrying a narcissist? Well, they don't necessarily come across as...
There's an element of deception there.
There's an element, but some of it is subconscious, where they're not necessarily calculated. Some are more calculated than others. And in some cases I've found that they actually believe that they are good husbands or good wives, because women can also be narcissists. They actually believe it. And, there's gaslighting and there's all this, manipulative behavior, but they've actually been able to persuade themselves that they're the right ones and the person that they are abusing are in the wrong.
But the problem in a marriage comes where the spouse that's the victim, with all the gaslighting and this kind of behavior, is they start to doubt themselves.
Yes.
And think that they're the one with the problem.
They're the ones that are crazy.
And when Diego's stepmom just recently, finally left her husband, she's like, wow, I actually have an opinion. Like, I forgot that I have opinions and I have ideas that matter. And
yeah, absolutely.
She found herself again.
Yes. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about, again, forgiveness, which is a non-negotiable. I believe that we all need to forgive, but I also believe that reconciliation is a good goal, but not always achievable goal, and it doesn't always depend on you. Forgiveness depends on you. In other words, if you're going to forgive someone, whether they're asking for your forgiveness, whether they've made a good apology, you forgive someone else who has hurt you because this is good for you. Reconciliation doesn't depend on you. It partially depends on you because you need to forgive before there can be reconciliation, but you can forgive and the other person, you may be dealing with a narcissist and you forgive and you're walking away from the relationship in the process. And so tomorrow we're going to be talking about separation and divorce in the context not just of adultery, but also abuse. And there are several types of abuse. And in the case of my father with his second wife and with my mom, which was his first wife, there was financial abuse. He used money to control and manipulate his wives. There was spiritual abuse. They will actually bring God and religion into the equation and use God and religion as a means to oppress and suppress the other person.
Like, you cannot leave me, the Bible says. You would be a bad person if you were to leave me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the person wants to love God and they feel...
and usually it's going to be people who are already very vulnerable and susceptible that are going to fall for a narcissist. So tomorrow we're going to be unpacking a little more how to walk away but in a healthy way. Because if you walk away and you hate that person for the rest of your life, you're letting that person hurt you perpetually. They've already hurt you, and there's nothing you can do about that. But if you're going to hate them for the rest of your life, now you're hurting yourself for the rest of your life, and you're allowing them to do that perpetually. So
yeah, and again, this is much beyond marriage. There might be someone at work. There might be someone, in another context that's...
Yes. Let's bow our heads and let's pray together. Father in heaven, we're so grateful that we've had the opportunity the last 4 nights to eat together, to fellowship, and to learn together more about marriage and about relationships. We ask a very special blessing on each person, each couple, each family represented here this evening. And I ask a blessing on this wonderful church that has decided to open its door and use its resources and its space to bless the community with so many wonderful activities and services. Lord, thank you, and we ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.